everyone. Welcome to Loving Life conversation series, People Who Change the World. Today we're on UC Berkeley campus having Professor Holtz, one of my favorite math professors from UC Berkeley. Welcome.
Thank you, Faye. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Yes.
We were just talking, how long ago it was, and then, time totally flies.
Yes, and I was telling you, they haven't aged at all.
Oh, come on.
So you are a mathematician and also recently a filmmaker. Right. How did you get started in film?
Oh gosh, I guess how I became interested in too many things is a long story, because when I was about 15 I was already interested in several things, not just mathematics. So mathematics was always sort of one of the things I really loved doing, way before I was 15, probably from the age of 3 or 4 or 5. But I was also very interested in literature, also back then, and I was also very interested in music. So it was actually a very hard choice to make, because at some point you have to decide what you want to specialize in. I decided to primarily pursue math. And then, that was sort of the constant in my life from that point on, or even earlier. But I couldn't quite let go of the other things I was interested in. So I guess literature never went away, and music never went away. And then, as you know, I was also doing ballroom dance,
yes.
like you were doing.
Yes.
I think at slightly different times, but close enough in time. So there are just too many fascinating things in the world. It's hard to do all of them.
Yes.
And maybe you don't need to do all of them, obviously, but certain things really catch your imagination, your fancy, and then you really feel your affinity to them, and then you want to pursue them. So I guess, that's a long-winded answer to your question, when did it all start? I guess it was so long ago, it's very hard to kind of place. So my interest in film is also very much constant, throughout my life. Back then, I just felt, there was no chance for me to pursue film, because even later, now I think there are many more opportunities for people to create short films or web series and stuff, and now everyone with a phone, yes, basically can make a movie. I'm not saying anybody can make an amazing movie, but the opportunities are much more democratized, right? So you can actually start making films without having like a super expensive camera, without having a lot of people, on your crew and so forth. So anyway, back then it was just harder to imagine how to proceed if you don't know anyone, if you are not somehow well connected and so forth. So film was something I kind of enjoyed as a viewer, right? As a person who loved film, this was always the case. But I guess back then I was not straight, it was hard for me to imagine that I would be making films one day myself, or at least maybe it was a sort of an unapproachable dream.
The longings of longings.
Yeah, unattainable dream, right. Yeah, as opposed to math, where you only depend on yourself, which is great, mathematics, unlike some other sciences where you need a lab, where you need expensive equipment, where you need lots of money typically to perform an experiment, like experimental physics or biology or medical sciences. In math, you can do experiments in your head, right? And sometimes, now more and more, also like using computers, obviously.
Right.
If you have a conjecture, if somebody has a conjecture, you want to test, is this reasonable? Does it make sense? You can try some numerical data. You can try creating like a special model to test. You can, now there is symbolic algebra. There are all sorts of, really nice software packages where you can test hypotheses. You can see numerically or symbolically what's going on, right? You can kind of start getting a sense of what happens in your problem, and that's great. But then at the end of the day, again, it's you and a piece of paper, basically.
And that's it. That's all you need.
Most of the time, yeah. You know, or whiteboard or blackboard. And of course, you know, most of the time you're just stuck, because most of the time there is something intriguing happening. So there could be a conjecture, or there could be just some observations you made and other people made. And then you go like, what's the unifying principle there? It's like, what, you know, what's an explanation for something that I see? There should be an explanation, because, you know, math is beautiful the way maybe some other sciences are not exactly, in the way that it's very structured, right? So there is always some like bigger underlying structure, and then maybe, you know, the imperfect humans that we are, we cannot see it, or we just see like a glimpse of it, but then we start realizing, okay, there's something bigger there, and then maybe we can figure this out. So math is really like almost being like, being a mathematician is almost like being a private investigator sometimes.
Private investigator.
Well, because you go from clue to clue, right? So there are breadcrumbs. So the universe is kind of cheeky, right? The universe doesn't give you the answer typically. It's very, very rare that it's straightforward and you just get the answer. You know, you ask a question and the universe gives you an answer. No, that doesn't happen. So you get like a breadcrumb, and then you get another breadcrumb. So you see certain things happening, and then you go like, how do I explain this, and that? And then I think they're connected. So it's like, you know, investigating a crime, although, you know, it's a much more, you know, sad and terrible situation usually. But, you know, in mathematics, there is nothing bad that happened. It's something interesting that happens, and you want to understand, you know, like the clues are there, and then you want to understand like what the mystery actually is. And sometimes it takes a few weeks, in which case I think you're super lucky. And sometimes it takes a few months, so it's maybe more realistic. And sometimes it takes several years, and even so, some problems remain unsolved, you know. So there are famous open problems that remain unsolved for years and years, and some of them for centuries. So there are some famous problems, for example, in number theory, that remain open for, you know, centuries, and then people still don't know how to prove or disprove certain conjectures.
So you talk about the moments of discovery. You keep collecting evidence, and then suddenly you know.
Right.
If you were to find some unifying principle for getting close to that moment, or getting more of those moments, what are the elements or environment you need to be in to be close to that?
Yeah, so if you are interested in the process of discovery, and if you want to really create more moments of discovery, I think you can try certain things. And again, nothing is a guarantee.
Right.
Nothing is a given. So you can say, I'll do X, Y, Z, right? And then, you know,
discover.
Count to 5. You know? And then something will come to me. It's never like that. So you can kind of create more opportunities. And so one thing which is always good is kind of testing the limits of your problem. So you typically have a concrete problem in mind, right? And you typically try some, you know, first things that come to your head. And, you know, if this problem is any good, then probably none of them works. That's sort of the starting point. So
yes.
You try something that, you know, first things that come to you, and nothing works. So then I think always need to ask yourself, okay, which way can I push this a little bit? And you know, kind of try to go beyond the usual, right? Try to see maybe there's something unusual here to this problem, and let's go there and try to understand. So it's again like unraveling a knot occasionally. Like you try different spots, right? Let's try pulling here, let's try pulling there, and then usually nothing works. And then suddenly you get something and it starts unraveling, and you go like, oh, I understand a little bit of this, so here's the structure I can kind of understand. And then follow this path, you know, for as long as you can. And then you get stuck again, typically, and you go like, okay, so I understood this little chunk, but I still don't know what's going on, typically. But, you know, I understood something, whether it's useful or not, you still don't know. right? But then you try kind of poking at a different place and saying, oh, this is slightly reminiscent of something else that I've seen before, so maybe let's try pursuing that. And then try follow this. So if you see any kind of opening, right, take it, and then see like how far you can go. And then occasionally you try maybe 3 or 4 of these things, and then you learned a little bit there, but it's still, you know, you feel like you have no clue. And then it's almost mysterious occasionally. So you walk around and you go like, I understand that, and I understand this. I still don't know what's going on. And then occasionally, which I think is actually fairly common, you suddenly realize, oh, I can combine these pieces like that, and now I actually learn something crucial. And then maybe it completely solves, like it gives you the huge opening, so then you can go and solve the whole problem. Or occasionally you really understood like a big chunk, and then it's much easier, and then you have to do something that you really kind of think you can do, right? So it's a much more realistic problem now. It can be reduced to another problem that maybe you know how to solve, or you think you can figure out how to solve. So there could be these moments where something crucial becomes clear, and that's fairly typical. So some crucial key fact, right, or key kind of little result becomes clear to you. And then you go like, oh, okay, so now I actually know because I understood this. It's like having a little key that opens enough doors, or, you know, you found enough keys to open enough doors, and then the rest you can do, or maybe you can just even force your way through.
Wow, force your way through.
Occasionally, yeah, occasionally it's not elegant. You know, occasionally they call it brute force.
Yes.
Right? So there are brute force results where you go something fairly tedious. You kind of know how to do it, and then so it's not pretty, it's not elegant, but you go like, oh, I can do it now, sort of by some sort of brute force.
Yes.
Yeah, so in analysis, I think this is a little more common.
With brutal force.
With brute force results. Yeah, this is not to say analysis is not fun. I think analysis is great. But in algebra, I think it's harder to find examples of this brute force arguments, because somehow algebra is about things sort of fitting exactly right. So it's more like a puzzle, or it's more like, you know, opening, like you need the exact keys to open the right doors. You know, you cannot just force your way through.
And how do you even know if the key exists or not?
Great question. So I think when you start learning math, you don't have good intuition for any of those things. You kind of learn by absorbing what people tell you, right? Mm-hmm. When you absorb enough information, you start kind of seeing patterns and saying, oh, okay, I start sort of getting a sense for how this branch of mathematics works, or I start getting a sense for how, you know, that works. But it's a long process, and so it's easy to look back. I think, you know, one unfortunate thing that maybe experienced researchers, professors can exhibit is dismissing more elementary mathematics as trivial. Nothing is trivial the first time you learn. Nothing is trivial. And actually, the foundations of calculus took people several centuries to figure out. You know, the famous epsilon delta definition of a limit took literally centuries to figure out. Newton didn't have a working definition of a limit. He had, I think he understood what limits were, but he didn't have an epsilon delta definition. You know, it was only in 19th century, by mid-19th century, Cauchy and others in Weierstrass, which is even later, you know, constructed a proper understanding of limits and derivatives and so forth. So even though people had been operating with derivatives and limits, you know, from Newton's times, they didn't have a proper rigorous definition of those things, which is fascinating. So likewise in physics, you know, advances are made and people discover things, but they don't maybe make rigorous sense for a while. If you look at the work in quantum mechanics, this was famously the case, because, you know, some magical things were happening, and then there was some kind of formal understanding of how they work from just observations, but there was no clean mathematical model to explain how they actually worked. And then there several models were created which are equivalent. There's a matrix model and there are some other models. And now we have a formal understanding. But again, do we truly understand? I don't want to speak for physicists. I think some of them will say we probably don't even fully understand it now.
Right. So it takes long time to even get like little in progress in really understanding. What do you think about computer science, AI, AGI? Some people say, why can AI beat, chess master but cannot do what a 3-year-old can do?
This is a great question. So if you look at the design of machines that, say, play chess, and now there are machines that play Go, I don't know how well they do, but I think there has been a lot of progress there as well. So there's a complex games with sophisticated rules, right? And the machines now can outperform humans, or most humans, probably all humans, because now even chess champions lose games to machines. So that's fantastic. I think it's a triumph of human mind, even though machines are doing this, right? But humans created them, so that's fascinating. But these are games with very specific rules, right? These are fully formalizable rules. They are mathematically describable completely, right? And then a machine has this mathematically solid, understanding of the game, and then now there were all these heuristics put inside these algorithms that allow them to actually find good strategies, right, for playing the game. And also what machine does much better than a human, modern machines do much better than a human, is looking at different choices. And then they can examine a multitude, like a huge number of possible choices, and sort of play out scenarios into the future much better, much faster than humans do. So now we're losing to machines. If we want to play chess, let's say, against a machine, why are we losing? We're losing because the machine is examining all these exponentially many possibilities. Not all of them, perhaps, because it has heuristics to concentrate on the most promising ones, but still, it examines many more possibilities internally than the human mind can do in the same time. So it's actually a timing question, because the machines are now outperforming us, dramatically in terms of arithmetic, right? In terms of calculation. So it's not that they do something dramatically different from what we can do, say by playing those games, right? It's just that they can do it much more quickly, So if a single human being is trying to play against a machine, then basically, it's a huge mismatch in computational power. The machine is doing much more than this human being is doing, and so therefore, not surprisingly, right, at some point humans start losing. And so now we are beyond the point, right, of losing. So this first happened probably 20 years ago or so, where, the world champion lost to a machine, and then now I don't remember the exact date, but now this is reality. So this is our new reality. Now, in terms of, so AI is great, right? You can say, therefore, right, ergo, machines are fantastic. They should do everything better than we do. No, that there is no implication like that. So the implication is, if you have a very specialized task that is formally completely describable by an algorithm, that you can code, and get the machine, like a powerful machine, to implement that, then probably a human being is not going to compete, right? Eventually the machine is going to outperform a single human being. Now, if you're looking at activities that we perform as biological beings, right? Biological, intellectual beings, physical beings, this is a lot more involved, because we absorb a variety of information from outside, from the outside world, and then we make quick decisions on how to proceed. So if you see something happening around us, an apple falls from the tree, and if it falls on top of you, you might have time to react and step away. If it falls in front of you, you might decide, oh, I want to pick up the apple, or something else. You react. You see like an animal running in front of you. You see lots of squirrels on the Berkeley campus. Yes. They're very smart. And so you can decide: do you want to engage with a squirrel? Do you want to offer it some food? Right? If you have some food, stuff like that. So for a machine to decide how to deal with the outside world, it has to have, first of all, a very effective model of the outside world and all the changes that can happen in, around it. So I think now with, for example, self-driving cars, that's a big problem that these systems have to solve. They have to have a model of what's happening around them. Right? And they have to decide how to react to things happening around them. And so it's a very controlled environment because it's the environment where a car is moving, right? So you don't expect suddenly, a dinosaur to land in front of you. Although, who knows, right? So if there were like an artificially created dinosaur suddenly put in front of a self-driving car, I don't know what this car is going to do. And things like that. So we have a model of the universe which also relies on what we have already experienced repeatedly. So if we see something completely out of the ordinary, we also get surprised, right? So we get stuck. It's like, oh, what is that? So how do I deal with this? So it's a similar reaction to how I think a machine would react, because that's not part of the model, right? And so the machine doesn't know what to do. But again, speaking of things we do know as humans, we accumulate that knowledge while we're very, very small, right? So starting again from birth, and then throughout the first years of our lives, we really kind of, why do kids love to touch things and kind of, maybe shake them and try different, try doing different things, because they want to understand what these objects are for, right? What do they do? Can they move? What if I drop something, what's going to happen? Sometimes with disastrous consequences. But I mean, that's part of understanding the world, because they need to actually build their model of the world. Like, what happens if I drop this glass? Oh, okay, it's gonna break. That's you need to experience that, or at least see that, a couple of times to understand this is a universal phenomenon. And so, for the machines to build such a sophisticated model of the world around them, I think they need to incorporate a lot of that sort of common sense information that we absorb as very young people, babies and toddlers and so forth. And this research about AI probably needs to collaborate a lot with the people performing research about human cognition. Because if we understand how to teach a machine something, it's probably going to be based on the knowledge of how we learn something.
Yes.
Right? And maybe not necessarily human beings, because again, animals are very sophisticated in terms of their models of the world. They certainly have a model of their, their surroundings. So it would be one day, I think, fantastic to actually understand like how they think about the world, because certainly, those simplistic models that animals are just essentially machines don't explain anything. They don't explain how they actually function.
Yes.
And then we see very sophisticated behavior, just like from humans, right? We, when we see animal behavior, it's very nuanced. It depends on many things. They interact in very, interesting ways. So I think all of these three areas of research should make progress, and probably will make progress simultaneously. Because if we start looking more into our own cognition at the very, very basic level, how do we sort of begin to understand the world, right? And also, how do animals understand the world? How do they, kind of create their internal model of the world? Then we can also say, okay, for an AI system, this is what you can do. You can emulate some of these processes.
So it's really about the three different fields moving together: how humans learn, how animals learn, and then how machine learns.
Absolutely.
Hopefully can learn from the first tool.
Absolutely, because this is what we have access to. If we one day we somehow establish contact with alien intelligence, it could be fascinating to learn how aliens, make sense of the world.
Yes.
Right? And then they probably, we might never meet any, alien civilizations. Who knows? But that could be hugely fascinating because their physical reality might be very different from ours, and they might have sort of different ways of building models of the world around them and how they function, right? So it's an entirely different kind of game, possibly. So,
yes.
But we don't have access to
right.
that, right? This is, the Earth basically is the world we know. We know something outside this world, but kind of to a limited degree. But we have this variety of animal species, right, on this earth. So I think we should actually learn from them, first of all.
Right, because we think we have more intelligence, so we start from the more...
Which is very questionable.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, based on some decisions we make as, collective decisions that humankind has made. This is very questionable,
right.
How intelligent we are.
Yes. I want to ask a related but slightly different question. What do you think learning really is? Because you are in the field of mathematics, you also produce film, which is very creative, is pursuing your dreams, and you're in education. I was having a conversation with my 2.5-year-old son, and then he doesn't want to go to school. I asked, what do you want to do? And he said, play. For kids, it's all about play, but it's learning, is play-based learning. They think it's having fun. But somehow when we grew up, people don't enjoy learning. They don't enjoy like writing homework, but learning is supposed to be fun. So to you, what are the key elements of learning and what could make learning enjoyable?
Well, I think ideally all learning should be actually fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and as children, I think we are all there, right? We all understand it in a very, similar way. So all children have fun playing with things. And, it could be games, it could be playing with other children, could be, pretending, something happens that, pretend kind of theatrical scenarios that they engage in. But this is all fun. And then it should be like that, actually. I think any kind of learning should be like that. So unfortunately, once children go to school, and again, I'm not saying this is universally so, but most of the time, children go to school, and then that becomes boring.
Yeah.
Like all this process of learning that they experience in school is much more likely to be really boring than to be really fun. Yeah. And that's a huge problem, actually. That's why you can keep hearing people saying, "Oh, I hate math."
Right.
That's a typical response that people give you once they learn you do math. So they go like, "Oh, I have never been good in math," and they kind of look proudly at you. I don't know why. I don't know what is there to be proud of, but okay. Or they say, "I hate math," with the same kind of expression. Right. And then there is a minority, I would say, that love math, or like math at least. And they say, "Oh, it's fascinating you do math," or and then there is a more kind of meaningful engagement with this subject. But of those that say they hate math, or they've never been good at math, usually what you hear, if you actually talk to the person, then what you learn, in my experience, invariably, is that they were bored to death at some point, right? In school, typically, early on, they were bored to death because they were forced to do meaningless tasks that are sort of mathematical, but are not really creative, are not really edifying, right? Are not illuminating anything in math per se, right? But we're forced to do rote memorization. We're forced to do things just because the teacher said so, right? So I hate hearing that. It's very sad to me when I hear this, and unfortunately it's very common because people often think that's proper learning, right? That's how they were taught, unfortunately, and that's how they think people should be taught, So even such simple things, the multiplication table.
Right.
People are taught to memorize the multiplication table. Why? I don't understand. Because multiplication, of integers is repeated addition. So it makes perfect sense if you understand addition, which I think we kind of naturally do, because we do understand adding one unit of something and getting a bigger number. But once you understand that, then you can start understanding multiplication as repeated addition. So saying 2 times 3 is putting twice 3 objects together, right, and counting how many you get as a result. And then that way you can verify the entire multiplication table just by addition. So there is no need to memorize the multiplication table at all. But of course, having experienced repeated adding many times, then you, I think, just organically will memorize the multiplication table. But there is a huge difference, in my opinion, between doing this organically and doing it just by rote memorization. Because if you just memorize these numbers, what does it give you? I don't know. As opposed to you actually understand how it works, right? And so the same applies at much, much higher level of math. I can always tell if a student has memorized something without understanding, because there is a vast difference. It's hard to explain, but there is a vast difference in how they respond to questions, how they respond to solving problems, because nothing can replace true understanding. And of course, the depth of understanding can be always bigger, right? You can always say, oh, I thought I knew something, but I now really understood it. And then sometimes, again, it's like way beyond the point by which you're supposed to have understood it. But I think there is nothing wrong with that. It's like, again, the epsilon delta definition of a limit was formulated in the 19th century, way beyond the point, of using limits and actually successfully using limits. People were using limits right and left, from the 17th century, certainly from the 18th century. So essentially for 2 centuries, they were already using limits totally comfortably, but they didn't have a formal definition. And so that was a point in history where I think many people would say, oh, now we really understand what a limit is. And that's okay. It's kind of after the fact, but that's when the true understanding comes. Nothing is wrong with that. So likewise, I think as a child, we all have these experiences where we heard something, we heard it maybe a few times, but then you really go through something in your life, and then you feel it, right?
Yes.
And then you go like, oh, now I really understood. Because it's all abstract, before, or, you just heard it from someone. It's absolutely not the same. It's like listening to a lecture, and it sort of makes sense, but it's not the same as actually working with that concept, yes, or having to use this concept. And then if you actively overcome difficulties by using this sort of abstract notion that you learned before, and it becomes something concrete, yes, then you really understand it. For as long as somebody just told you something, you heard it in a lecture, you read it in a book, it's not the same.
Yes.
It's like, again, it happened to someone else, right? It's somebody else's experience. Unless you go through that mental experience yourself, it's not the same.
So the level of understanding something is much deeper when you are actually the one who goes through it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about math, you have to be very focused. What do you think about, really focusing on a problem when you were describing how to discover, you pull here, pull that? Do you shut everything off? Because I feel in our daily life, there's so much distraction.
Noise.
Exactly.
A lot of noise.
How do you have that mental clarity?
It's tough. So also, one thing about focusing, you can be overly focused sometimes. So if you really need total concentration, no, complete silence around you, nothing happening in the background, it might not be always conducive to making progress, because usually that means you're kind of tight, right? You're tight inside. You go I need to solve this.
Yes.
God damn it. You're figuratively banging your head against the wall. And maybe occasionally it works for some people. I mean, I don't know. But I feel maybe there are moments like that where you go like, yeah, I need absolute concentration. I need to switch everything off and really figure something out. Because there could be moments where you feel like you're very close. And again, the more you do it, the more intuition you build about your own process, right? You actually understand better how you discover things. This is one, great consequence of more experience, is that I think you are more comfortable with how you work, with who you are, and you are more accepting of your limitations, and you are more, I think you're kinder to yourself. You know how to create the right environment for yourself. So that's what you might not have as a very young person. You go like, I need to figure this out, or else, the world is going to hell. No, probably not, right? Probably you have more time than you think. But then if you have more experience, you kind of sometimes have this feeling where it's very close, the opening is coming. And then you can decide to push hard, and you could say, I need total concentration, no sound, nothing at all. I really need to spend as much time as necessary to figure this out. But, maybe 3 hours later, you still haven't figured this out. Or, 3 days later, you still haven't figured this out. And so you cannot fully force discovery, right? Occasionally it comes at really weird moments. So it's often the case that people are not actively thinking of a problem. They're in the middle of something much, a much easier task. They're more relaxed. They're listening to music, or they're walking home, or, they just woke up and they're in this kind of half asleep state, which is an amazing state, by the way, for discovery.
And half sleep state.
Yeah. So some people swear by it. They say their best ideas come to them when they're sort of in this half asleep state, and there is some science to back it up. I'm not very well familiar with that, but supposedly having certain, there's deep sleep, and then there are different depth levels of sleep. So at certain levels, you're more likely to make connections that your brain was trying to make before, and then it couldn't. Right, so literally physical connections, electric connections take place inside your brain, right, where synapses have to fire and actually form connections. So the process of learning is literally building new connections inside your brain, right? So you need your body to cooperate. You cannot just force it, right? So your body has to build this somehow. Your mind, which is part of your body, right, has to build these connections. So it's very hard to say, do this, and then it will happen. You can start thinking about the problem. I mean, you need to be really thinking a lot about the problem. It needs to mean something to you, right? If you're just trying to do it just to get, a check mark against something, yeah, maybe if it's a simple problem, yeah, maybe you'll solve it. But if it's a research problem, typically it's much harder, right? And so typically you need to be really passionate about this. And then passion means you're really thinking about this all the time, or a lot of the time, right? And even when you're not actively thinking of that, it's sort of in the background, right? So it's kind of on the back burner. So you're still thinking about it, even when you're not.
Right, and then you attract the resources. Once you do this, then you start to make connection to the back burner problem. Yeah. So not only you do math research, you also produce movies, you write scripts, which are creativity flow. How do you write script? Is it a similar process to math, or is it a completely different process?
It's fascinating. So the writing process, the screenwriting process, is actually not that different from the process of doing research I think in any area, but in particular doing research in math. It's a little bit different, of course, because it's, anyone can put words on paper, or words on inside a file. So that is not the problem. I mean, putting words on the page per se is not the problem, but again, a story, a good screenplay is so much more than that. So it's not about, you know, how pretty your words are on the page. And there is that too. I mean, obviously, eventually you want your page work to be excellent. But that's not the whole story at all. You know, when you go into what they call development, right? You're developing a story. You're starting to see, okay, is there something there? Is there a screenplay there, right? Is there film there, as they say? So you want to actually start with story design. And the story design is a little bit like math in a way, because you want to tell a compelling story, right? And then certain things there have to fit, again, and they have to be tight. It's almost like constructing a mathematical proof. It's different, obviously, right? But again, it has to contain all the essential parts. You don't want to be distracted by inessential elements of your story. So you really want to see is like, how do you design? So there is, again, you may have heard a real life story, and then you go, wow, there is something that really touches me there, right? So then you need to kind of look inside very closely and say, okay, what is it that really resonates with me? Because usually there is something that kind of creates this excitement, right?
Yes.
And so then you need to concentrate on that. So you actually have to go quite deep, and you have to say, okay, what are these important essential elements that really resonate with me? And then you have to say, okay, how do I design a story around this? Maybe not exactly the way it happened in real life, if it's a true story, right? Or not exactly if you're adapting a book, you're adapting a novel, you can also say maybe not exactly how it was there, but how can I enhance this resonance that, you know, affects me, so that I have a hope of affecting similarly other people. So it's also very internal, you know, it's a very internal process, because unless you are excited about something, there is no chance you can create anything that other people can find exciting. And also, you should not try to engage everybody, because, you know, it will not resonate with some other people, no matter what you do. And likewise in math, right? So certain things you do will get other people super excited if they have worked in the field and if they know what it is you've done. But some other people will kind of shrug their shoulders and say, so what? And that's okay too. And then I think now with the enormous amount of content that we see, all the streaming services that we see, I think people appreciate this a lot more, because if you look back at television, let's say, 20 years ago, these were shows that were made for everyone, whatever that meant, right? So what does it mean? We don't know. And actually, we shouldn't know, because people are so different. They have different tastes. Different things really kind of engage them. That way, you know, once this understanding came to platforms like Netflix and Amazon and so forth, they realized that it's it makes much more sense, business sense, right, to make a show that could be just for a certain audience, right? It's sort of niche, again, whatever your definition of niche means, but, you know, certain audience that really will engage with that show, that will be really passionate about this show. They will really watch the entire show, they will watch all the seasons, right? As opposed to some people that might find it like, no, it's not for me, you know? It's not for me, and that's okay. You know, if it's not for them, then there should be content for them, right? That's a different film or different show, and that's perfectly okay. So, but again, the design process comes from a very personal place, where you go, something here really makes me go like, wow. You know, it could be bittersweet, and, you know, it could be a poignant. I love stories which are intellectually engaging. So smart, right?
Yes, smart stories.
Smart stories, right? Smart stories. So, I mean, I like the genre of thrillers, for example, but I hate thrillers which are by the numbers, you know, paint by numbers, sort of, oh, you know, here's an action thriller where, you know, the good guy has to escape from the bad guys. Okay. We've been there, we've seen that. Not that, I mean, some of them were excellently made and you know, good per the model that they use, But again, that would not be for me. So I like intellectually engaging, sophisticated thrillers, but I also really love characters that are non-trivial, shall we say? So I hate, again, this bad guy, good guy scenario.
The one-sided, black and white.
This is just so boring. Okay, antagonist that's just bad, and the protagonist, which is just good. I think we're hopefully really stepping away from this, because like the shows that I see now and the films that we see now are really not trying to rehash this paradigm. It's like good guys versus bad guys. Gosh, this is just...
It's more sophisticated and more authentic.
Exactly.
I watched your introduction for the short film you did, the Zihir, and you said, I hope by watching it, you can pursue your dreams. And I also read through your script, there seems to be a theme of pursuing your dream at all costs. What does dream mean for you? And what does pursuing your dreams at all costs mean? In modern society, many people say, oh, I have a dream, but I need to make money. So I want to do film, but my mother wants me to study economics to become a finance. And how do you reconcile this societal conflict between dream and reality in a way?
I guess it's hard. So there is no universal answer there. Again, there is no simple answer. I wish it were not so. I wish anybody could just say, okay, now I'll go for a year. I'll work, as you said, at some financial company or some other company, make a lot of money, come back, and then we'll realize all my dreams. It's not exactly so simple, because anything has a cost, right? And so what's the true cost? The true cost is time. That's the ultimate cost to anything. And we live and we don't fully appreciate how little time we've got. I think it's hard to always think about this. It's also a little depressing if you think about this all the time, but we don't have that much time on this planet. Even the luckiest of us who will live 100 years, it's not that much time, frankly. So it kind of it's a sobering thought. So then you have to say, okay, so how do I use my time efficiently? And so you can still try to say, I will, again, like if I need to raise money, I'll try to do it quickly. But then most people will just get bogged down into the
forever raising money
in the process of providing for themselves, and then typically again you need to provide for yourself and your family, and life interferes and things happen. So it's tough. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's tough. So I wish all the people with creative ideas could just magically get resources and realize their creative ideas, because I'm certain there's so much out there that's just not been realized, and I think the world would have been in a more interesting place, and probably a more, I don't know, just a more fulfilling place, right?
Yes.
If more creative ideas had been realized. But at the same time, things like film, unfortunately, are still very labor intense, right? Very financially demanding. So you cannot, again, if you want to make something which is good, say a full feature film, you need a fair amount of money. And so you need to convince people to invest in your project. And how do you convince people? So this is a little bit of a catch-22, right? So if you're already established, probably people don't need that much convincing. Right. And then if you're super established, then people will run after you and offer you money, right? But for people who are less established, who could have amazing creative ideas, the problem becomes, okay, how do they actually gain access to resources? Right, so they might have amazing ideas, and given resources, they would become established over time, right? But nobody gives them resources because they're not established. So this is a little bit of this catch-22. And so I see lots of writers, unfortunately, writers and filmmakers and different types of creative people struggling with this because it's very hard to invest in a project. I fully appreciate the hesitancy that people with resources have, because how do you invest in a project or in a team typically, right? So you're investing in people, right? You're investing in a team. So you need to be fairly certain that they will do a good job, that it will not be some disaster, right? And then everybody will just waste their time. And again, time, money,
right,
everything. So you want to avoid these disastrous situations. And if someone does not have an established track record, how do you do this? And so it's all tricky. I totally understand that many people are reluctant to go there. So then it becomes this question of how can you prove that you can do a good job without having done a good job on a big project before. So a friend of mine is doing a startup, speaking of, similar things. So I think maybe it's a similar world. It's maybe not exactly the same, but there are lots of similarities because again, someone who embarks on this process needs to know what they're doing. But if it's a new startup and the person has never done this before, how do they know what to do, right?
Yes.
So this becomes this catch-22, and well, perhaps investors in high tech are a little bit more
risk-seeking, right?
Yes, more willing to take on risk because they fully understand that most of the time they will not recoup the money, but once in a while, maybe once in 10 startups, it will do really well.
And you will return the whole fund.
Then you'll return everything. So it's a question of diversifying.
Right.
So in film, it's a little bit similar, but even successful films are usually not as wildly successful as successful startup, tech startup companies. So there you will get your money back if it's successful, but will you get much more than what you invested? Probably not.
Yeah, 1x is good enough.
Exactly.
Tax
exactly.
Is 1,000x.
Exactly. 1x is good enough. And I know a little bit about budgeting because I had to deal with some of that a few years ago. So it's fascinating. But just recouping your money is good.
Yes.
Just returning everything you invested is good. But if you want to go sufficiently beyond that, it's certainly not comparable to the tech world where some of the startups will return, as we just said, 10x or even beyond that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were discussing on the phone. When people invest in film, a lot of people do it for the dreams. And how do you price a dream? The dreams can be exponentially more than anything else in financial terms. Final question, how do you measure the success of your life?
So my personal life?
Yes.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I guess I never think that what I have achieved so far is truly success. No, seriously, like everything feels trivial in retrospect, right? So you look back and you go like, you've done this and you've done that. It's like, when you work on your PhD, it's looming ahead of you. It's this big goal. You think like, oh my God, I will be so happy, once I get my PhD. It's such a big, milestone. And then you get your PhD and it's very anticlimactic. So you go like, now I have a PhD. Okay, I guess that's okay. So
what's next?
Right. So no, seriously, that's how it feels. It feels very anticlimactic. So likewise, I would apply for a grant. Let's say it's a fairly big grant, and then you put a lot of effort and thinking and time into this, and you go, I really, I will be so happy if I get this grant.
Yes.
And maybe you don't get it the first time, but you get it the second time or something. And then the moment the announcement comes, you go like, now I have the grant. Okay.
Right.
So it's very strange. And then I don't know if the others are experiencing this similarly, but I feel when success comes, or any kind of measure of success or sort of event which you could call a milestone, you go and say like, oh, okay, but it's not this insane jubilation that people picture usually when they think of that. And maybe there is a moment of happiness, but literally this is just a moment you go like, wow, you know, this happened.
Right.
Okay, this is amazing. But it's just so fleeting. It's just so quick to go.
Yes.
I don't know. And then there are usually responsibilities. So, you know, if you get your project funded, then you go like, oh, now comes the hard part, right?
Now I have to do that.
Now comes the hard work. So it's like, again, with a friend of mine who is now trying to raise money. So suppose he raises money, then comes the hard part, right? Because once somebody invests, that he has to actually deliver.
Yes. So it's really not about the milestones, the accomplishment. If you were to live until, I don't know, 200 years, however years you want to live, and then you're at the end of your life, and what would you have done if you look back and you could say, oh, I've had a good life?
I guess one measure, which could be maybe somewhat unusual to put out there, is not being bored. You know,
not being bored.
Right. So I feel like most of the time I am I'm really interested in what I do. I'm really intrigued by what I do. It's fun. It could be challenging. It could be a little frustrating, like with these problems that do not allow a quick solution, or even with film work or script writing, anything really. And it could be really hard, but then you are really stimulated by what you do, right? So it's never boring. I think having a boring day is actually kind of tragic.
Yes, because you could have been doing other interesting things.
Exactly. Yeah. Not to mention, you had a boring week or a boring month
or a boring year.
Yeah. I mean, this is so sad. No, seriously. So if it's something boring and then you find yourself spending like a lot of time engaging in boring stuff, then it's sort of like not really living that time, right? So you're existing in that time, but you're not fully alive because you're not fully passionate about what you do. So and again, passion doesn't mean you're crazy and jumping up and down. It just means that your attention is fully on what you do, and then you are stimulated emotionally, you're stimulated intellectually. So that's, I guess, a measure. It's kind of maybe strange to put it out there, but to me this could be a measure of success. And it doesn't mean material success necessarily, and it doesn't mean some sort of list of accomplishments that you can then give, to at the end of your life and say, yeah, look, I've accomplished X, Y, and
track
Z.
record.
Here's my track record. I mean, again, nothing is wrong with that. I think it's wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's probably was I really doing what I wanted to do? Was it fun? Again, not in a superficial,
yes. Did you enjoy
sense, right? Not in the superficial sense of fun.
Yes.
But was it something that really truly engaged me? Occupied my mind, occupied my heart.
Yes. Not being bored. That's a great measure for success. I hope you were not bored in the last 1 hour.
It was a lot of fun. Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Professor. Can I give you a hug?
Sure, of course.
And yeah. Oh, you smell nice. So I shall clap. Done.
All right.